section 2 of module 4, we're looking at inverse and relations and functions. So an inverse, this reads, if we have some function f like f of x, right? This f to the -1, it's not an exponent -1. That reads f inverse, or the inverse of f. Okay? So if we have two functions, f and its inverse, inverse kind of means going backwards, like adding and subtracting, we're going backwards, right? Multiplication, division, going backwards, okay? Then f of a equals b if and only if I plug in b into the inverse and I get a. What that means is if I have some numbers 1, 2, 3, and I plug those numbers in and I get, say, x, y, z. So I plug in 1, I get x, I plug in 2, I get y, and I plug in 3 and I get z. And then if I go backwards and I plug this into another function and I plug in x and I get my answer is 1, I plug in y into a different equation and I get 2, and I plug in z into a different equation and I get 3, those are inverse functions. So if I have some function that takes this 1 to an x, this 2 to a y, and the 3 to a z, and I take all three of those answers and plug them into a second function, say h, and I get back to my originals, that means these two functions are inverse functions. For example, x minus 5 and x plus 5, those would be inverses because I could plug any number in. Say I plug in 7 into f, I would get 2, right? And then I take that answer and I plug it in this one. I plug in 2 here and I get 7. So I got back to my original 7. That means these two functions are inverse functions. So find an inverse relation. So basically it's just going backwards. My x's become y's and my y's become x's. So they just switch places, right? And we can see that from this previous one right here, right? This was my x and it became my y value. This was my y value and it became my x value. So the x's and y's kind of just switched places. My y became my x and my x became my y. So as we look at this problem, all we have to do the inverse function is really just to switch these. Set notation, so 4 then 2, comma, and then 2 then -3, and then 1 then 4. So that would be the inverse relation, is just switching those x's and y's. And then it says graph both the original relation and its inverse. Okay, so if we graph this, it would be 2, 4. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. -3, 1, 2, 3, 2. And then 4, 1, 3, 4, 1. It looks like that. And then if we graph the inverse, we go 4, 2. So 4, 2 is a little bit higher than that one. 2, -3. So 2, -3 looks like that. And then 1, 4, 1, 4 looks like that. And this is kind of hard to see because it's not on a graph paper, but basically they just fold over this line y equals x because my y's became x's and my x's became y values. They just switch places. So that is how you find an inverse relation. You're just switching your x's and your y's.